Okay, so now we're back over to our drum rack and we're on our snare again. So we've got the SPL Transient Designer on here. And what I'm going to do, because I want to achieve the best of both worlds here, I want the attack and the punch of the Transient Designer, but I want the fatness and the chub of the compressor. What I'm going to do is use one of Ableton's very handy functions, which is creating an audio effect rack. So I'm going to click on the Transient Designer, and I'm going to press Command G on my Mac, which would be Control G PC. And I'm going to create an audio effect rack with the Transient Designer in here. And you can see we've got it, same settings, everything's preserved. But instead now I'm going to go to my plugins and I'm going to grab the Universal Audio 1176 compressor. And I'm going to drag it down into the Drop Audio Effects Here section, and it's going to create a parallel chain. So here's our compressor. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the compressor. So I'm going to solo this chain, so all we're going to hear is the output signal through our compressor. Now, again, this compressor is physically modeled on the actual Universal Audio unit that was created, the 1176, which is a famous and amazing compressor. It sounds accurately just like the hardware. And again, you can see the interface is very simple. So this compressor is missing a parameter here that a lot of you would be looking for, which is threshold. And that's because this compressor actually has a fixed threshold. The way you control the amount of compression that's happening is by turning up the input knob. And you can tell how much compression is going on by looking at the VU meter. Now, I really actually like the fact that this is running on a VU meter, because a VU meter will give you, rather than a peak meter, will give you a very accurate reflection of what the sound is doing based on how the human ear hears. So I'm going to watch the VU meter and dial in by changing the input knob so I can get a decent amount of compression. And again, I'm just going to solo my beats here, so all we're hearing is the snare. So you can see we're getting about 2 to 3 decibels of gain reduction here on the meter. So if I turn up the input, we're going to get more severe compression. There we can see more down in the range of 7 or 8 decibels of compression. So I'm gonna leave the compressor right around here. There we go. And next we have the ratio section. So this compressor has fixed ratios. It's got a 4:1, 8:1, 12:1, and 20:1, which is more or less limiting. But this compressor also has a very special mode that you can use with it, which is a quirk from the original unit, which is pressing all of the buttons in at the same time. And you can mimic that on the software side by holding down the shift key and clicking, and you see all the buttons go down. And this engages a kind of radical and crazy compression mode that was true to the original unit. And this is what it sounds like. So pretty radical compression. For the time being, I'm going to leave it on 8:1, and I'm going to dial in some attack and release settings. So you'll notice it's got a dial for attack, it's got a dial for release, which is what we would expect. Now, these knobs act a little counterintuitive on the 1176. You might expect that 1 is a faster attack and 7 is a longer attack, but actually it's the opposite. So because we're compressing percussion and they're very quick transients, I actually want to be using quite a fast attack. So I'm going to turn the attack all the way up. And I also like to create with my compression here a pumping compression. I want to have the tail of the decay of the snare hit be accentuated. So I'm going to actually turn up the release as well, which means the release will be quick, which means when the audio signal drops below the threshold on the compressor is going to let off very, very quickly, allowing the sound to pump back up in amplitude after the compressor has released. Next, we have an output knob, which doesn't have any effect on the other parameters. It doesn't change the amount of compression or anything like that. It's purely the amount of output gain that is happening. So I use this as a level adjustment here. Now, I told you guys earlier that we were going to use this to achieve the fatness and the punch or the fatness and the chub of a compressor with the punch and the attack of the transient designer. So now I'm going to show you how we use these in tandem with each other. So I'm going to use this compressor in parallel using a New York style compression technique. So in order to do that, I'm going to depress all the buttons here because I want that radical, extreme compression characteristic. So this is what it sounds like just running through the compressor. That is just absolutely spanked. So the challenge with compressors is when you compress this hard, you lose the transient punch, the initial attack of the hits. So that's where our transient designer is going to come in handy because it's amazing for attack. You can dial in exactly how much attack you want. Now, I don't want to leave these two running at the same time because I want more control over the amount of the New York style compression that's coming in. So this is why I chose to use the audio effect rack, because the audio effect rack has this handy little function here called the chain selector. And these two chains are running in parallel, which means each one is independent and it's effectively doubling our signal. And both are running at the same time. Now, if I select both of these and drag these little blue bars out, and then I click on the bottom one, which is this is our New York style compression. I'm just going to rename this. I'm going to call this 1176. And this one up top is the SPL. So now I know which chain is which. Now I have the ability to, with the 1176 compressor, go up here to the top little blue bar. It's almost hard to see. And I'm going to take this and drag it out. And you'll see what this is doing is this is adding in a little crossfade. And then I can take the actual chain selector up here, and I can use this to mix in directly in the track without using any send and return. I can use this to mix in the amount of New York style compression. So if I have it all the way over here, then all I'm hearing is the SPL. If I have it all the way over here, I'm hearing an even mix between the SPL and the New York style 1176 compressor. So let's listen to our signal and dial it into taste. Yeah, I like it around there. I actually like a fair bit of that New York style compression. I'm just going to dial it a little bit back. And there we have it. We have a very simple audio effect rack. We haven't used any sends and returns. We've used the SPL Transient Designer to add a lot of attack and punch to the initial transient of the snare. And then we've used the 1176 compressor as a parallel compressor, absolutely spanking the signal using that all buttons in mode and a very fast attack and fast pumping release time to get the best of both worlds. We have the chub and the loudness of compression, and we have the attack and the punch of the transient designer. So I'm really liking how this is sounding on my snare. I'm going to go ahead and actually just do exactly the same thing to the kick, because I typically will do that to the kicks and the snares. And then we'll come back at you and we will start on the next piece of our tutorial. So I've done a similar chain to the kick here. I've just copied the same audio effect rack over and I've changed the settings a little bit. So on the SPL, I'm using, again, boosting the attack, cranking the sustain all the way out, because in this case on the kick as well, I have some aspect to the back, the release of the note that I really like. And then I have the 1176 just absolutely spanking it down on the same compression settings and mixed in a parallel New York style fashion as well. So here's what the original sounds like with the rack deactivated. And here's what our affected version sounds like. Keeping in mind, of course, that this is louder, so it's going to sound better regardless, but it has boosted our signal to be hotter, but it's also making everything crackier and punchier at the same time. And you can especially hear the back end of that note, the kind of creak to it. I actually really like that because there's a lot of space in between my beats here because this is a slower tune. So yeah, I really like what these effects have done with the kick. So that wraps up our section on transient designers and New York style compression with the 1176. Next up, we're going to use Universal Audio's reverb plugins to dial in some space around our sounds.